Hello my friends and welcome back to our ProRevenge series, where many of you come to get your dose of satisfaction by listening to stories about others getting what they deserve. In today's episode, there are going to be 5 stories. The first is a family dispute over a grandmother's ashes. The second story is about a customer trying to scam a mechanic. The last story is about why IT workers should not be messed with. I hope you stay for the stories today and hit that subscribe button for future stories. Let's get into it. This first story is titled, Trying to Prevent My Mother from Spreading My Grandmother's Ashes? Okay, I'll take some. My grandmother died in November of 2016. It was a really hard loss for my family, especially my cousin, who was very close to her. We had a beautiful end-of-life ceremony for her in lieu of a funeral, and she was cremated as well. My aunt kept the urn. Over the years, my aunt has gone from being a manageable pain to a completely self-absorbed, borderline unstable individual. I could go on and on about the drama she's put my family through, but the important bits for this tale are that she lived closer to my grandmother throughout her life, so she saw her more often. However, my grandmother seemed to prefer interacting with my mother because she's lower maintenance than my aunt. One last thing, my aunt has kicked my cousin out of the house about 4 times since he turned 18. They butt heads frequently. She's an alcoholic and he's, 18 and headstrong. After the end-of-life ceremony, my aunt stopped talking much to my mother. She never really mentioned having the urn, and my mother never laid eyes on it, despite it being her mother. A year or so went by until one day my aunt popped up and stated that she was going to spread the ashes at a nearby beach that we all visited throughout our lives. She picked a date without consulting anyone, specifically not my mother, and said, "If you can make it, great. If not, tough luck." Needless to say, everyone was miffed, but my mother, myself, and my cousin switched our work schedules to be there. This was communicated clearly. Fast forward to the week before the event. My aunt now messages us all, stating that she has an obligation the next day and will not be able to handle the ashes spreading on the planned date. She changed the date to 1 week later and again said, "If you can't make it, tough luck." My mother and I were irritated and stated that we didn't think we could change our schedules 2 weeks in a row. My aunt went on to say that it was my mother's fault for the dates, which was due to her schedule, and ended it there. My mother and I spoke at length. She was hurt and angry at her sister for not consulting with her about how to handle the ceremony with the ashes, and even more upset that her own sister would not wait to do this with her. When asked why this had to be done now, as opposed to waiting until everyone could be there, my aunt stated that my grandmother's brother, who is in poor health, wanted the ashes spread as soon as possible so he knows it was done, and that he wanted a video of the event. My mother eventually told my aunt that she wasn't going to go, and that she just wanted to see the video that my aunt took of the event. She was focusing on her own mental health and didn't want to compromise her progress because my aunt causes so much stress. This enraged me. I was upset already, but was completely floored by the idea that my aunt would have this ceremony without anyone present but her and her boyfriend. I was so hurt for my mother, who clearly was just avoiding conflict with her sister, and now would end up missing this event that could bring her closure with her own mother. I was frustrated for myself and my cousin, who would have also loved to have the experience of letting go of my grandmother's ashes together as a family. So, I made a plan. My cousin was still living back home, and he was also furious with his mother. I told him, "Hey, I need you to do something really weird, but it's for my mother. Like a trooper," he said. "Anything for you guys." And that's how the ashes heist began. My cousin didn't hesitate. One afternoon while my aunt was at work, he broke into the urn and took about half a cup of my grandmother's ashes. He double-bagged it and promptly hid it in a container of hair pomade, like a grandma drug stash. Later that night, in the dark and pouring rain, we met in an abandoned parking lot where he passed me the goods. He said he took some of my grandmother's ashes for himself too. We felt vindicated. We hugged and parted ways. 2 weeks later, I gave my mother the ashes in a tiny keepsake urn while visiting her for my birthday. She cried, we hugged, and I could see the anxiety about the whole thing wash off her, because now she's in control of her own goodbye ceremony, independent from my aunt, who has no idea what happened. This past Sunday, my aunt spread the ashes at the beach, and guess what? She didn't even take a video. She still hasn't responded to my mother, who asked for the video the day of. My cousin says the urn is empty, and no one's heard from my aunt at all. I imagine myself being so much more furious if I had trusted her. I imagine my mother being devastated and never being able to do anything about it. My aunt lives in a world where she planned the event with no regard for anyone else and lied about taking a video of it for the family. A video that would have been our only connection to that moment, a moment that she robbed my mother, my cousin, and me of. She has no idea what my cousin and I have done, how we had to plan in advance for her selfish behavior to ensure that we were spared from her selfishness. It's so unfortunate to hear something like this happen to a family. A once-in-a-lifetime thing like that should have been accommodated for everyone to participate in, and the aunt not even filming it for anybody to see is a total low blow to the family. Opie also has some edits to the post, and it reads, "I wouldn't have switched the entirety of my grandmother's ashes with some powdered substance for 2 reasons. The biggest being that it would completely expose my cousin as an accomplice, and put him at risk of losing a place to live in his last 2 weeks of high school before college. I'm not going to jeopardize my cousin's life in any way. While she may not have been able to tell the difference between fire pit ashes and people's ashes, the risk is there. Second, and also important, is that taking all of the ashes would rob my aunt of a ceremony for her mother as well, whether she would know it or not. I'm hugely upset with her actions and ending a relationship with her. However, the point of me doing this was because she took the choice away from my mother. I'd feel awful for doing the same to my aunt, despite her actions. I may not be beyond taking some of the ashes, but I wouldn't be able to justify that level of revenge. I think the real revenge here is that I outsmarted her by taking some of the ashes, and that she's literally losing the entire family due to her selfishness. This story is titled, "Make Me Wait for Money? I'll just take my engine back." My grandfather had been retired for a bit after getting hurt on his job at the railroad. Being a little bored at the time, he offered a local independent Volkswagen shop owner his time to run for parts and other errands in exchange for some help on his car. So, my grandfather returned to the shop in the afternoon one day to find Jay, the owner of the shop, mingling and acting pretty upset. He asked him what was up. The story went that Jay had just rebuilt and installed an engine for a customer. When the guy picked up the car in the morning, he paid with a check. This was not uncommon at the time, being 1980. When Jay went to cash the check at lunch, the bank informed him that the payment on the check had been stopped. He asked when this happened since he had just received it a few hours ago. They told him it was stopped that morning. So apparently the owner of the car paid the bill and then went to the bank and immediately canceled the check. Jay called the guy on the phone and asked him what happened and why the check was canceled. The guy said, "You made me wait for my car, so I'm going to make you wait for your money." What had happened was that one part for the engine had been delayed for a few days, and Jay couldn't finish the job on the deadline. But as soon as the part came in, he put the engine back together and got the guy the car back. Needless to say, Jay was upset. It was Friday, and he wanted to wrap things up a little early. Getting paid for an engine rebuild was a nice way to wrap up the week. Now, the revenge. Jay asked my grandfather to come with him. He grabbed a few tools, hopped in his little pickup, a Volkswagen, of course, and off they went. Jay drove over to the guy's house, knowing where he lived from the address on the canceled check. He pulled up to the guy's house and proceeded to remove the engine from the car in about 10 minutes. While this may seem unbelievable, if you've ever worked on an old air-cooled Volkswagen, they are literally held in by 4 bolts, a couple of screws, and a few wires. A good mechanic could have one out in no time at all. After it was removed, my grandfather helped him put the engine in the back of his truck. A bulky, complete Volkswagen engine is not that heavy. After they had the motor loaded up, Jay wrote a note and left it under the wiper. The note said, "When you decide to pay me, just add extra money to pay for the removal and replacement of the engine and for the time it took for me to come over here and get it." And they drove off. The guy obviously called back and was livid that his new engine wouldn't start. It may not have been obvious when he walked over to the car and noticed it wasn't sitting right. He ended up calling Jay and was promptly chewed out by Jay about the whole thing. He was told that if he wanted the engine back, he needed to pay the extra time and in cash. This is a pretty good pro-revenge story, but I have 2 questions that maybe a few of you listening can answer. Was it really that easy to disconnect engines back then in the 1980s? And were they actually light enough to be lifted out with 2 people by hand? Second, does anybody have any experiences working retail where people wrote checks but had no money in their accounts? How did that work back then? Did they just get away with free stuff or what? This next story is titled, "Lie, Cheat, Lay Off, and Gamble with Our Wages? Enjoy No IT Department." Years back, I worked as the IT director for a small brokerage firm. These types of places try to run lean, so I was the only IT personnel. I took the job, but I was a bit underqualified, if I'm being truthful. The reason they gave me the job was because I was young and naive, and they thought they could underpay me. They were right. It was $10,000 more than I had ever made in my life, and I had a low-paying job at the time, so I took it. Honestly, it did work out as a good resume builder. There were a couple of gems, but ultimately we were understaffed because they looked at full-time employees like we were stealing from them. They made us work long hours and weekends with no overtime. Everyone was underpaid or an overpaid buddy of someone. Worse were the partners. The 4 partners were constantly doing shady things. One partner would take money from broker commissions and go to Vegas with it. If he lost the money, he would just let the brokers know that there was a hold from the bank and their commissions were coming in slow. Another partner asked me straight up how to hide his affair from his wife. Another had me come to his house on the weekend to install some audio-video equipment without paying me. Then the partners started doing really sketchy stuff. They had me open employee exchange mailboxes and run mail queries on email addresses. It turned out they were lawyer emails between the lawyer and their client. They also had me look through a few broker and employee emails. They had me do this all the time for anyone. I would have to collect it all, and then they would fire them and keep their clients. I didn't know it was illegal to snoop through company emails at the time. They somehow convinced a lending company to merge with them, a totally different crew. They were nice, honest, real, customer-focused people. I made friends with one of the lending agents, the nicest guy. His wife and her dad ran the firm until the merger. I found out that the plan was to fire everyone from the lending firm and just take the name and the client list. They had only been there a few months, long enough to learn their business. I also found out that they were going to fire me now that everything was more reliable. Guess how I found out? It was during an email query that one of the partners had me do on another partner. So, the only nice people at the job were getting locked out of their offices over the weekend, and I was getting fired. I had essentially made myself redundant in their mind. Well, let me tell you about the red folder. The red folder was locked in my file cabinet. It contained every password for admin access to every system. It also contained the fire plan or downtime plan of every system in the company. My boss didn't really understand why we needed one and never really looked at it. I called my friend who worked for the lending firm. I told him to head to the office and grab all the files and computers. They technically belonged to them anyway. I told them the plan about changing the locks over the weekend. I told them I was quitting and to not mention me. He said he understood and thanked me. I changed the only other admin password that my boss had access to and shredded the red folder. I emailed my resignation. They begged me to come back, offered me a 30% pay bump, and said they were shocked that I was so disloyal. I heard years later from a secretary who worked there at the time that it took them 4 months to get all the systems under control again. They had to use a contractor they relied on before, and I heard it cost them a year of my salary. This is why you don't mess with it, workers. I've heard horror stories about IT workers leaving companies and absolutely wreaking havoc on their last day. This next story is titled, Mother Lies Takes Money From Me and Then Gets Screwed Over Financially. I'm 19, a female, and had only been living with my mother for a good 3.5 years since I was put into foster care at a young age. I don't remember living with my mother at all before moving in with her. She would tell me how great it would be for me to live there and how I would be treated with respect and so on. Well, since I started college, things went downhill. My whole life, I wanted to go to college for art, but my mother convinced me that it was stupid, so I chose to go for a business degree. My first semester of college, everything started out fine. Then, the end of September hit, and I got a reimbursement from financial aid. Let me add that my mother is on supplemental security income for minor disabilities and hasn't worked in the past 18 years. She has arthritis and fibromyalgia, so apparently she can't work. I got public assistance that I never knew about since I was never allowed to do paperwork for anything. I thought we only got food stamps, but apparently she lied and said that I was paying a couple of $100 a month for rent so she could get more money. So she was getting nearly $500 a month from my needs and $350 a month for food stamps. I want to note that I was never allowed to eat at home anyway. I got a healthy $2,000 back from financial aid, which I originally planned to spend on clothes, a laptop for school, and food. Well, apparently every time I got money, it belonged to my mother. She demanded that I give her most of the money, so I spent about $1,500 on some jeans, a brand new PlayStation 4 system, a PlayStation Vita, PlayStation Plus, and a bunch of PlayStation 4 games for my boyfriend. She was furious and belittled me until I gave her the rest of the money for so-called rent, bills, and food. She took the money and went and bought her boyfriend drugs. I was mad because obviously that's just not okay. I just pushed through the semester and kind of sucked it up like I usually do. February came along, and pretty much the same thing happened. She demanded my $3,000 to pay for rent, electricity, Wi-Fi, food, pretty much everything under the sun. She got mad when I refused to give her more than $350. I went off and spent the money on my anniversary, a new phone, a prepaid phone plan for the next few months, and I also bought myself some food for when I was at home since I wasn't allowed to eat. She was irate. How dare I spend money on my boyfriend and not the woman who gave birth to me? I tried staying away from home as much as possible, but every time I came home, I would get yelled at. Well, March was when everything crashed. I needed my Medicaid card and birth certificate for a program that helps people get jobs in the area, and my mom kept them and wasn't having it. Apparently, saying that I needed the cards was being rude and disrespectful. I ignored her for the most part and kept insisting that I needed them right away because I had to leave. She gave them to me after half an hour of me telling her that I needed to leave and just started yelling at me. So I left for a few hours and I got a call from my caseworker asking when I would turn the timesheets in. She told me that I could lose the cash assistance if I didn't. I asked her what she was talking about and she told me that I got approximately $500 a month to pay for rent and other things I needed and had been getting paid for a while. I informed her that I never knew that, and she was very upset that my mother was using the money on who knows what. She told me to change the PIN on the card and not let my mother touch it. So, I changed the PIN on my card, went home, and my room was torn up. My clothes were everywhere, my laptop was missing, and my Christmas gifts from my boyfriend were gone. I was very upset. I told my mother that I wanted my stuff back, and she just threw everything at my door. I started packing my bags because I was done with her nonsense. She demanded that I give her my Medicaid card back since she'd always kept it. She got in my face, threw my glasses onto the floor, tried throwing my new phone, and was just screaming at me until I gave it to her. I relented, knowing that I changed the PIN and she couldn't use it. After she went to the store and tried buying something with it, she came home and started shoving me around, demanding that I give her the PIN. She was telling me that I was just like my father, how I was a piece of trash for buying jeans that actually fit me for once in my life, and how I was garbage for liking the presents I got from my boyfriend and not from her, and so on. She actually hit me because of it, and hit me until I gave her my PIN. So of course I was foolish and gave it to her. For some reason someone called the cops and they showed up shortly after. She and her boyfriend started telling them that I was hitting her and that I was a pathological liar. I showed them where she hit me and tried explaining that she took my Medicaid card, but they didn't care. After the cops left, my mother said that my boyfriend was not allowed to enter the house again. Then she said I had a new curfew of 6 p.m., and if I left the house, I was never to return again. So, I left. My boyfriend took me to a homeless shelter specifically for teens and young adults who were in abusive situations and had nowhere else to go. The following day, I went to get a new card, and my mother had taken out $160 at 5 a.m. With the help of my oldest sister, I had $4 to buy food for the next 2 weeks before I could apply for my own food stamps and cash assistance case. Most of the time, I only had water, and I would eat every 3 days at my boyfriend's house. When the virus hit, his dad refused to let me over, even though he knew what was going on to a certain extent. I didn't eat anything for a week before being able to get food stamps. I wish I'd gotten a job, but having 8 classes took up the majority of my time. The college suggested that I withdraw to focus on my mental health. I went from seeing my therapist for half an hour every other week to seeing her for an hour every week. She suggested that I cut contact with my mother permanently, even though it meant losing a good $3,000 worth of stuff I bought for myself over the past 12 years. I was so upset about losing 40% of my stuffed animals. They really meant a lot to me, and they were kind of the only things that helped calm me down during a panic attack. I know it sounds immature, but I've had most of them since I was 8 years old. Then, something popped into my head while I was applying for my own food stamps and cash assistance case. I realized that I could easily report my mother for welfare fraud. Not only had she been taking $500 a month from me, but she lied and said her boyfriend and she didn't share food and were so-called roommates. She paid to use other people's food stamps, and she sold her food stamps for cash to buy fast food or drugs. So I did just that. I went to her state's website and reported her for fraud, adding when she took the money from my card at 5 a.m. that one day. I went into detail, gave the exact location of where she did it, and everything. I said she used other people's cards all the time, which was very true, and how she demanded my card whenever I had it. A couple of weeks later, I got a letter from the Department of Social Services, and they accidentally sent it to my address instead of my mom's, thinking she moved along with me. I opened it and read that she was denied public assistance, denied medical insurance, and denied food stamps. She met the requirements for getting them, but because of my report, she lost everything but her SSI. As far as I know, what probably helped was that I told the DSS that she stole my card and requested a new one, and the lady at the front desk was mortified. She's now out $850 a month and out of health insurance, which was paid by the state, all because of me. I boasted about it to my therapist. My therapist actually congratulated me, and I'm very shy with people, so to report something like this was very unlikely unless you got me very angry. I'm not sure if this was appropriate here, but it took a lot out of me to be able to even do it. Thanks, anxiety. I got so much satisfaction knowing that OP's mom is no longer getting any of that money. Taking money from your daughter is one thing, but to demand it and then use it to buy your boyfriend drugs? Oh my goodness. I'm sending you a virtual hug. I truly hope that you're in a much better situation in life right now, as this is a much older post that I'm reading. Yeah, I just hope things are working out for you. This next story is titled, I Froze My Psycho Neighbor Out of Her Apartment. In college, my two friends and I decided to find a place together off campus. We found a beautiful 3-bedroom house with surprisingly affordable rent. The basement of the house was listed as a separate apartment, but as it had a separate entrance and the indoor stairwell had been blocked off, we weren't worried. The thermostat was upstairs. Then the demon neighbor moved in. From upstairs, we could hear everything. This adult woman would call her mother and scream at her to pay for her cell phone bills and give her grocery money. She would scream at whatever guy she was sleeping with to bring her meth. One day she brought home 3 puppies to scream at too. We were terrified of this woman, and the noise was unbearable. Also, we'd been foolish enough to sign a lease stating that we were responsible for all utilities, period, meaning now we were financing her gas, water, and electric. But with only 2 months left on the lease, we thought we could just ride it out. But then she started smoking constantly. According to the landlord, she had quit for good when she signed the lease, but for good only lasted 2 days. Since it was winter, the heat was running nearly 24/7, and the smoke was wafting up from the vents. Our apartment and all our belongings began to reek of smoke. We contacted the landlord because we signed for a darn non-smoking apartment. He told us that we lived in a state where you could technically call an apartment non-smoking, even if it's shared ventilation with a smoking apartment. At this point, my 2 roommates were heading out for a 2-week vacation, as they were online students, while I was residential, leaving me alone in the apartment with the demon smoker in the basement. I couldn't sleep or eat because my foolish stomach decided to react to all the secondhand smoke by aching and cramping constantly. After 3 days, I was a little insane, so I made a plan. I checked the forecast, lows in the 20s all week. I borrowed a friend's ultra-insulated sleeping bag, and I bought one of those ski masks with holes for your eyes and mouth. I got all my stocking cap, my silk long underwear, my woolen socks, and my down parka. I bought tea, hot cocoa, and ramen, and prepared to live off a diet of hot liquids. Then I turned off the heat. Day 1, she's screaming at her mother for forcing her to move into this frozen heck of an apartment. Day 2, she's screaming at her boyfriend because he won't let her move in with him. Day 3, she's screaming at the landlord about how she's freezing. Day 4, the landlord's at my door. I greet him in a full ski mask, parka, stocking cap array, looking like I'm headed off to rob Santa Claus at the North Pole. He asked me if I didn't find it a little chilly in the house. I replied that I found all the cigarette smoke to be a little warm. Day 5, she's screaming about the jerk upstairs to anyone who will listen, and I'm sitting upstairs clutching my car keys and my pepper spray with 911 typed into my phone. She finally decides she's leaving and moving in with Greg, quote, even though he just got out for stabbing Travis, and he lives in that creepy house in the woods with all those biting dogs. Day 6, she's gone. I silently bless Greg. The moral of the story? There's a darn reason the rent seems too good to be true. P.S. For those wondering, I did have a friend who worked in plumbing stop by to give me some advice about how low I could go before I burst the water pipes. These stories left an impression on me, so here's my viewpoint. Story 1. Trying to prevent my mother from spreading my grandmother's ashes? Okay, I'll take some. I was furious reading about the aunt's selfishness, dictating the ash-spreading ceremony without consulting the family. Her disregard for the narrator's mother, who deserved closure, was heartless. I admire the narrator and cousin's bold move to secure some ashes for a private goodbye. It was a clever way to reclaim control. The aunt's failure to even record the event proves her lack of care. I'd have been livid in their shoes, but I respect their restraint in not taking all the ashes. It's a bittersweet victory, ensuring the mother's peace while navigating family drama. Story 2. Make me wait for money? I'll just take my engine back. Jay's revenge was genius. The customer's stunt, canceling the check to make Jay wait, was infuriatingly petty. I love how Jay turned the tables, removing the engine in minutes and leaving a cheeky note. It's satisfying to imagine the guy's shock finding his car engineless. I can confirm old VW engines were indeed detachable with minimal bolts, and 2 people could lift one. Back then, bad checks were a retail nightmare. Businesses often ate the loss unless they pursued legal action. I'd have cheered Jay on for his swift justice. Story 3. Lie, cheat, lay off, and gamble with our wages? Enjoy no IT department. The shady partners in this story made my blood boil, exploiting employees, snooping emails, and planning betrayals. I felt for the narrator, underpaid and naive, yet their revenge was masterful. Shredding the red folder and tipping off the lending firm was a brilliant power move. I'd have been tempted to do worse, knowing they'd fire me. Workers hold immense power, and this shows why you don't cross them. The chaos that followed was well-deserved. I bet those partners regretted their greed. Story 4. Mother lies, takes money from me, and then gets screwed over financially. My heart broke for the narrator, betrayed by a mother who stole her money for drugs and lied about welfare. The abuse, physical and emotional, was horrific, and I'm relieved she escaped to a shelter. Reporting the fraud was a courageous act of justice. I'd have done the same, though it must have been terrifying. Losing her stuffed animals was a gut punch. I get how much those comforts matter. I hope she's healing now. Her mother's loss of benefits feels like karma for such vile manipulation. Story 5. I froze my psycho neighbor out of her apartment. This story had me laughing and cheering. The neighbors screaming and smoking were unbearable, and I felt the narrator's frustration with the shared utilities and smoke-filled apartment. Turning off the heat was a bold, if risky, move. I'd have been too nervous about confrontation. The landlord's visit while the narrator was bundled up was hilarious. I admire their grit, enduring the cold to drive her out. It's a perfect lesson. Cheap rent often comes with hidden costs. I hope they enjoyed the piece afterward. That's it for this episode of our ProRevenge series. If you didn't catch the last episode of our ProRevenge, it's a really good tale, so if you haven't heard it, click the video right now. I hope you all got your revenge fix for the day, and I'll see you in the next one.